Okay, welcome to Tech Tuesday. Today we're going to be covering TED and Khan Academy. I'm Julie Wachowski. I'm the Literacy Coordinator for the People's Resource Center. Welcome. We started off with a fun activity, which I think is kind of links into what we're doing, because it has to do with online learning, and not just online learning, but ongoing learning. So we started by passing around a device that is made of cardboard and Velcro, and it's completely and it's got some glass here. And basically, this came in my Sunday paper, and it has a QR code on the bottom, which is a way of communicating website information to a device, usually a phone. So using a QR reader, which I have loaded on my phone already, I clicked on it, and it gave me access to a website that had visuals which had been filmed with three-dimensional cameras. And this device, when I slip my phone into it, allows you to look through and move your head and simulate Google Glasses.
So what's it called altogether? Google
Glasses. You see the bottom, it says Google. So this is the cardboard Google Glass version. I think you can buy them online, actually, Google Glass, yeah. This cardboard version. It's pretty cool. There's all kinds of new things happening all the time, and to get into the mindset of a person who is a lifelong learner, I think is part of what this is all about, and part of what Tech Tuesday is all about. How do we become lifelong learners? So I love both of these websites as keys to lifelong learning, because they give us access to a basic liberal arts education. Anyone can listen to and watch these websites, and you get a background in almost anything you can think of. So, moving on. So, here we go, lifelong learning. More liberal arts for everyone. That's my hope with this TED Talk. So, let's talk about, we kind of went over in part one. I included in part one of online learning some information about different models of teaching and how the delivery system of online learning can change how learning happens, that you can use a different model. The traditional model is the one that you see me doing right here, which is a person talking and other people listening. And so it's basically a teacher and a student. You guys are listening to a lecture or to some presentation with a chalkboard or a whiteboard or whatever. These two websites, Khan Academy and TED, are very similar to what we all feel very familiar with in terms of our educational model. And so I think they're an easy entree access, an easy way to begin exploring online learning. The difference that you have available to you when you're using something like Khan or TED is that it's not just one student and one teacher, but it's one student and many teachers. You have lots of different people who can give different examples, have different teaching styles, have different expertise, and all of them are available to you as the learner. So that's kind of exciting. Okay, meanwhile, back at that traditional instructional model, which is what we have here. TED and Khan are both lesson or lecture driven. They're both instructor driven. The instructor decides what's important to cover, and the instructor gives you the information. There's not a whole lot of room for back and forth and questions because it's pretty much complete. This instructor sets it, records it as a video, and you consume it. So in that sense, it's very similar to classroom instruction. However, there are some differences. One of the things that you have with a website like TED that you wouldn't have in a regular classroom is that you get to decide on the content. So you get to pick from all of these different subject areas, all of these different teachers. And you have over 2,000 talks available on TED right now. They cover the gamut. So TED has a slogan, and that slogan is "Ideas Worth Spreading." A little bit about the history of TED. It started in the early 90s. Well, actually, I think the first conference was 1984. I always think of it as, I lived out in Silicon Valley at the time. And so I was hearing about the TED conference as it was just getting started. And I remember thinking of it as being a very exclusive high school prom for nerds. You had to pay $6,000 to attend the conference, and that was, you know, a huge chunk of money back then, and still is. And you got to mingle with people who were the smartest, the coolest, the ones that were doing really interesting things that affected computers, that affected the entertainment industry. So any place that people in Silicon Valley were working and making money, those people were being drawn to the TED conference. I think the initial one, they debuted one of the first Apple computers after post-Mac. One of the men who was responsible for developing fractal imagery for films was a speaker at one of the first TED conferences. So you can imagine it was very exciting, very hot to be able to go to TED. To get invited, there was a limited number of tickets, so it was a big deal. It spread over time. More people were invited. The original slogan for TED itself is technology, entertainment, and design. Those were the focuses of the conference. So there were artists, there were engineers, and there were scientists attending. As the conference grew, they added philosophers, politicians, anyone who was working in the social sciences began to be interested in presenting at TED. Bill Clinton spoke in the early days. You know, there was a lot of shift and broadening in what was available. So now you can go online and you can find, you know, 2,000 different topics. You can learn about subject matter that is hugely varied, from hard science to social science, and all of the talks are 18 minutes or less, which I think is another interesting point, because it helps you understand what is the sort of best format for delivering information in this media. People get tired of watching TV after a while. You know, I guess unless you're watching Game of Thrones and you're doing a big, massive back-to-back viewing. But you take breaks. You can only take in so much information. And about 18 to 20 minutes is a good cutoff for a lot of instruction. So Most people get tired at about an hour. Most people want a shift of topic after about 15 minutes. So I think that they made these talks more effective by keeping them short. One of the things, if you haven't investigated TED Talks, one of the things that is a great way to start is to just go online and Google, you know, most popular TED Talks, top 10 TED Talks, that kind of thing. And you'll get lots of recommendations. And they're slightly different depending on which source you go to for the recommendations. This is the landing page if you call up the TED website and you want to begin. You can use it in more than one way. You can create a login here so that you can go back in and have a personal account connected to TED, and that actually allows you to leave comments on after you view a presentation. But you don't have to log in. You can go through and just watch straight up. So that's nice too. Every day this bar changes. They add new programs you can watch, talks you can watch, and you know, you can comment using these buttons as well. This one already has 600,000 views. Now I have technical information on views. I think they're in my notes and I don't have access to them right here, but I believe it's 1 billion views as of February 2014. So the TED site and the TED Talks have generated over 1 billion views at this point. And I think that's important to note, because if you're not watching TED Talks, if you haven't experimented and watched one or two or engaged in the website at all, then there is a piece of our social consciousness that you're not yet a part of. And people who are movers and thinkers and are interacting with the web are very aware of TED, because it is something that came out of Silicon Valley, and this is their industry. And so, you know, if you're not there, you're not part of that discussion. So I think everybody should experiment and take a look at and look for a TED Talk that might mean something to them. So, for instance, and this is the other way that you can look for TED Talks. Many people who are thinkers, authors, politicians have been invited and have done TED presentations. There is more than one conference. The main conference is done now in Canada, but there is more than one branch of TED now. So you will also see, in addition to the regular TED, you will see TEDx, TED-Ed, TED with an ED, and TED-Med, which is for medical information. TED-Ed is for education, talks just on education. The TEDx is like TED in addition to the regular conference. Those are held all over the world, usually at universities, and they invite people. They do them in different locations, and I think, you know, there's a different one in the US every year in addition to the regular conference that's held in Canada. An important thing to note, TED is run by a nonprofit. It began as this, you know, for-profit gathering of thinkers that paid money to go, and it evolved into something that is now run by a nonprofit. The Sapling Institute or something. The man who is in charge of it, his name is Chris Armstrong, and he is a British publishing magnate. He was the one who adopted the new slogan, which is "Ideas Worth Spreading." So that's kind of their motto, is to, you know, move information out into the world. So if you're not logging on to TED and you're like, okay, let's see what's available on TED today, another way to access those talks you might be interested in is just to Google TED Talks on something. So if you're looking for TED Talks about a person or by a person, you can just put that in. There's a talk that I really like that is basically a modeling of the scientific method. And it is this young man. He is an African child. He's only 12 or 13. And he lives on a farm in Africa, and the farm was plagued by lions. And the boy explains how he had to take the night shift, and he didn't like taking the night shift because he had to stay up all night, and he had to keep the lions away from eating their cows. And he doesn't like doing this work. He wants to find an easier, better way to do this work. So he notices that the lions don't like lights. And that's one of the things that they do to keep them away, is just like swinging the lanterns. So then he starts to think, well, isn't there a better way that I could have lights to keep the lions away? And he invents a little, like a flasher from a bike with a solar diode that he connects to the flasher that is like for a bicycle, which is something he had available and nearby, puts the two together, mounts those flashers at different random places around the circle of the fence of his farm, and that flashing light ended up keeping the lions away. Well, then an old woman from the town that's a neighbor of theirs, she can't keep the lions out of her fence either. She's like, could you make me one of those light things that you made? And so the boy says, sure, and he makes one for her. And then other people find out about this light fence thing that he's invented, and he goes on to build them all for everyone in the town. And it's a great example of how you observe a problem, you test, and then you implement a design that works to solve a problem. So I think it's a really cool TED Talk. If you have an opportunity, that's one to check out. These are some of my other favorites that don't often pop up on those top 10 lists, which I would recommend. Karen Armstrong is a philosopher, and she writes about religion. And she was a winner of the TED Prize, which is another topic, for this talk that she did called The Charter of Compassion. And it's a great one. This one, Sugatra Mitra, is one that I've recommended before. This is the School in the Cloud. And he's talking about how people use computers and how we can use computers to move people out of poverty. Amy Cuddy, Your Body Shapes Who You Are. The short term for that talk is power posing. And that's something I use with my speech students at the high school. Basically, she goes through some explaining a personal situation in which she was in a car accident, and how it changed her physically and it changed her mentally, and how she recovered some of her confidence and her understanding of how the brain works based on the physicality of your body. And it's really fascinating. That's a fascinating one too, speech. And this one by Dan Gilbert on happiness. I think everyone who works at the PRC ought to be watching that one. so highly recommended also. Okay, so there are two additional things that I was going to mention about TED. One is that the Wheaton Public Library does a monthly viewing of TED Talks and a discussion. So if you go on the Wheaton Public Library website, they'll show which TED Talks they're viewing right now, and people gather at the library in one of the common rooms to talk about what they watched. And I think that's another fun way to engage in conversation about these this important information that's being exchanged. Another TED offshoot, which has just started recently and I really enjoy, is a podcast called the TED Radio Hour. And this one I put on while I'm washing dishes or cooking, and I like.
Are there like perceptions that people have?
I like this one that I was listening to recently. It's from the end of October, and the title of this radio hour was Playing with Perceptions. The description says, where do stereotypes come from? Why do some perceptions persist? And is there any truth or value to the assumptions we make? So what they do over the TED Radio Hour is they pull different speakers and they weave them together by topic or theme. So this one here is, was I thought kind of relevant to what we do here at PRC, so I thought I'd share a little bit with you.
Each week, groundbreaking TED Talks.
TED Talks.
TED. Technology.
Entertainment. Design.
Is that really what it stands for? I've never known that.
Delivered at TED conferences around the world.
The gift of the human imagination.
Skip. Okay,
I'm Guy
FYI.
Raz. So a few years ago, Sarah Jones went
Sarah
to
Jones.
LA to audition for a TV show, and this was before she became a well-known playwright and performer. Anyway, one afternoon, she took a walk around Hollywood.
And I was walking with a fellow woman of color, as we say, and we were crossing the street. I think it started to say "Don't walk" as we were, making our way to the other side.
And out of the corner of her eye, Sarah saw a police car drive up, lights flashing.
And I remember thinking, oh, I wonder who they're flashing their lights at. There aren't any cars in the vicinity. There's only the two of us crossing the street. There's no way we could be, getting pulled over. You can't get pulled over while you're walking. And in fact, you can. And they did bend us over the car and say, are you girls working tonight?
Oh.
That was, and it wasn't even nighttime. It was like the middle of the day.
So they sort of stopped you and they told you to turn around so they could frisk you?
Absolutely. It was like, are you girls working tonight? And, I just remember, I can't say I went ballistic, but I had the instinct that if I started talking like that, they'd be a lot more respectful, that I'd sort of stop them with my superpower of transmuting my class status and nationality in the moment in real time. But I thought better of it, thank God.
Oh no.
So it's important to know that this is what Sarah Jones does as a performer. She becomes different ethnic characters. And by the way, all the voices that you'll hear for the next 10 minutes or so, they are all Sarah Jones. And a few years ago, she won a Tony Award for a play she wrote based on those characters. Now, all that success happened long after that day the cops stopped her in Hollywood. When Sarah realized her first instinct was not to be herself.
My thought was, I need to elevate my status somehow. I'm a woman of color, I'm with another woman of color. We're, low on the ladder of who requires respect.
So the cops did let Sarah and her friend go after about 10 minutes. But at that moment, it hit her just how much she'd internalized the way those cops saw her. And how even before she spoke a single word, all of these assumptions were made about who she was. So when she went back to New York, she started to focus her work on this very idea, on how we perceive others and how they see us.
Wherever I am and there's an underground or a bus system, I try to ride it. And looking at all of these people packed into a small space together, I've thought about, what if, the kid, or the young dude, African American, whatever you want to call it, he's standing there, kind of looking around the train and he sees this little old lady. And what if he looks at me and he's thinking he knows what's going through my head? And what would I have to say to the both of them? And that it is entirely possible that we would all come together and say, did you see that episode of Game of Thrones last night? My God.
My God. Isn't that great? Yeah, so this is another great way to experience what's happening on TED if you have an interest. Podcasts. Okay. So here's something interesting. We were talking about people who present on TED and how often leading thinkers and people who work in the tech industry are often featured. It just so happens that this is the guy who invented Khan Academy. And I'm going to show you. This is the landing page for Khan Academy and their slogan, "You can learn anything." I became familiar with Khan Academy while my children were in high school. And they were taking higher level math. I can totally handle the English. I cannot handle the math. My husband was often not available to help them with their math homework, so I needed other assistants and other experts who understood the math, the higher level math, better than me. So this website you have access to teachers who are explaining math. It began with math and science, and they're explaining this math and science in front of you. So we would, when my kids were having trouble with the subject, we would pull up the Khan and listen to the explanation here. It was a supplement to whatever they got in the classroom. So if the teacher went too quickly in the class, this was another place that they could look at the material. This is one of the things that's different about online learning to classroom instruction, and one of the most powerful things. You can stop, you can pause, you can repeat. That's not something that you can do with me unless you say, "Wait, stop, ask a question," right? But if it's not a time or a place where you can make the instructor go back, often that's not working. The interesting thing too is that people will explain mathematical concepts differently. One teacher will explain it one way, another teacher will explain it another way. Sometimes a kid will understand it the way one teacher explains it, but not understand it the way a different teacher explains it. So by having another teacher available who can explain it with different words or different examples, you often have the opportunity to help them understand, click with that subject, click with that demo. So let's take a look. So we're back to the TED page here, and I'm going to, you've got the big play button, you just click on that and it shows you more about this. Take a look here. He's close to 4 million views already on this one.
Khan Academy is most known for its collection of videos. So before I go any farther, let me show you a little bit of a montage.
So the hypotenuse is now going to be 5. This animal's fossils are only found in this area of South America, a nice clean band here, and this part of Africa. We could integrate over the surface, and the notation usually is a capital sigma. National Assembly, they create the Committee of Public Safety, which sounds like a very nice committee. Notice this is an aldehyde, and it's an alcohol. Start differentiating into effector and memory cells. A galaxy. Hey, there's another galaxy. Oh, look, there's another galaxy. And for dollars is their 30 million plus the $20 million from the American manufacturer. If this does not blow your mind, then you have no emotion.
We now have on the order of 2,200 videos covering everything from basic arithmetic all the way to vector calculus and some of the stuff that you saw up there. We have a million students a month using the site, watching on the order of 100 to 200,000 videos a day. But what we're going to talk about in this is how we're going to the next level. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about really just how I got started. And some of y'all might know, about 5 years ago, I was an analyst at a hedge fund. And I was in Boston, and I was tutoring my cousins in New Orleans remotely. And I started putting the first YouTube videos up really just as kind of a nice to have, just kind of a supplement for my cousins, something that might, give them a refresher or something. And as soon as I put those first YouTube videos up, something interesting happened. Actually, a bunch of interesting things happened. The first was the feedback from my cousins. They told me that they preferred me on YouTube than in person. And once you get over the backhanded nature of that, there was actually something very profound there. They were saying that they preferred the automated version of their cousin to their cousin. At first, it's very unintuitive, but when you actually think about it from their point of view, it makes a ton of sense. You have this situation where now they can pause and repeat their cousin. Now they can, without feeling like they're wasting my time. They could, if they have to review something that they should have learned a couple of weeks ago or maybe a couple of years ago, they don't have to be embarrassed and ask their cousin. They can just watch those videos. If they're bored, they can go ahead. They can watch it at their own time, at their own pace. And probably the least appreciated, aspect of this is the notion that the very first time that you're trying to get your brain around a new concept, the very last thing you need is another human being saying, "Do you understand this?" And that's what was happening with the interaction with my cousins before, and now they could just do it kind of in the intimacy of their own room.
I think what's most interesting about how this works is his telling the story of how he was tutoring his cousins and they liked him remotely better than they liked him in person. And the reason that they liked him remotely was because they could replay and watch it again. So that the places where they were fuzzy or they weren't following his logic, they could look at it again. What happens is they begin to tell their friends, and then on YouTube it begins to spread and other high school kids begin to pick up on it and it starts to become a thing. He's using that example at the beginning where you saw the electronic board with the neon colors there. That's how he works a lot of his problems out. That's how he solves a lot of information, math problems and things. So that's sort of a classic con look, is that blackboard with the neon colors. The interesting thing is, although it began with the hard science and hard math, it has spread. And one of the things I find pretty exciting is that you can now go into math, science, economics. There's an arts section that will take you to museums all over the world. There is a computer section that will teach you how to program. There's test preparation. So if you want to prepare for SAT, ACT, and various other tests, they're just beginning to add GED information here. So this will be important to our clients and people, in the coming months, I think. And here's the partner content that's available where they have modeled on the Khan system. Short lessons, again, remember that 18-minute mark. These are sometimes between 5 and 15 minutes for the most part, the lessons. This partner content, though, is pretty cool. They have NASA on here. I'm not sure if you can see that, but you can go in here and you can link to lessons on space that are presented by people at NASA. So this, here's the British Museum. You can go to the Tate and see art that's available at the Tate. You can go to the British Museum and see art and artifacts that are available there with talks and information about it. So it's a new way of providing the information that was once available through the public library, where you would go in and check out a book on the Tate and look at paintings. Now you can actually see that walk through of the museum, a video of someone presenting what the painting means, interpreting it and giving comment on it. And I think it won't be long before we can experience it like this in a three-dimensional viewing of that same information. So there are people who, you know, the comments on Khan Academy sometimes in terms of the negatives are about the fact that this man was not a teacher. He was not trained as a teacher. He's very upfront about that, and sometimes that irritates people. He is a master of content, but not necessarily a master of teaching. So he will say, I didn't prepare before I went to talk about this, you know, part of geometry. And some teachers find that very irritating. You know, it's not good teaching modeling to not prepare what you're presenting. But he is a master of content. He does know the math. He does know the science that he's teaching. So, you know, sometimes when he gets something wrong or he's inaccurate, the other thing is that he's putting it out there for everyone to view. And the people correct him. They send in, you know, comments and say, look, this isn't right, fix it. And he does. So I think that's another kind of exciting aspect to his teaching, that he will put himself out there for the purpose of letting people moderate it and see if he can make it better. So it's another, that's something that teaching doesn't always incorporate into, you know, a presentation. You might ask for a response or a survey, but many times that survey is impacted by the teacher's relationship with the student. So in this case, where you have a little more distance, maybe you can be a little more forthright about saying what's not helpful or what's inaccurate. And I think he's made a powerful use of that as a positive for educating people. Something to keep in mind. So I wanted to put it out there now for all of you to experiment on your own machine with topics that you might be interested in, and to take a look at both TED Talks, maybe some of the ones that I recommended, or Khan Academy, and take a look at the things that might help you. A young person that you know of who's working on higher level math or science, or even lower level. It goes all the way down to kindergarten. I think maybe I should start over with kindergarten math and see if I can work my way up. Questions? Comments?
Is there topics like teaching English or teaching citizenship? For instance, I've gone to YouTube and looked up those topics, and there's a lot of videos. Would there be videos here for those things?
Yes. So TED Talks is more aimed at sort of college level sociological information sharing. There is information about U.S. history in some of the TED Talks. There are there will be commentary and information about becoming citizens and citizenship and how it works, but not necessarily training for it. There is U.S. history background and civics training on the Khan Academy website. So you can find lessons to watch, like he showed in his 30-second montage, the thing with the U.S. government and the founding fathers talking about, I can't remember. So he does have some citizenship information that would be useful. Other questions?
On the 18 minutes is the best amount of time to spend. Doesn't that apply to teaching English? We would have to do reading for a certain length of time. Then you have to switch to writing or
Yes.
vocabulary or some. It's just, it's applicable
It
to,
is.
To people teaching reading.
Teaching anything.
Teaching anything.
Anything.
Right.
There's a, I mean, if you think about yourself and your own attention or, you know, learning, ideal learning amount of time, that's pretty realistic. At least if it's, it doesn't have to be that you're in class for 18 minutes, but that,
No, but you would
that
go to
you're
a different,
shifting gears.
yeah,
Yeah.
shifting gears to something else
Yeah.
rather than just reading and then the tutor correcting your pronunciation. That would get pretty tiring.
So actually, that was kind of a question I had. What are some of the things that people have come up with, or you've come up with, when you're doing a TED Talk or you're doing a Khan Academy to improve your learning of it? So, you know, we watch a TED, and I know some things you do, like, but, so we watch a TED Talk and we're like, wow, that's really cool. I really learned something.
Right.
But what do you
How do you
build on that, share
integrate
that?
it and retain it and other things? So that's a good question, and I think it's relevant because one of the downsides of any online learning experience is that learning happens when there is a human connection. And that human connection can look different for different people. But that connection is part of what helps solidify the ability to retain and repeat the information for later use. So how do you incorporate that into something where, you know, you could be viewing this by yourself on your phone, under the covers, you know, alone in your room, you know, the world's biggest misanthrope, right? And I think that part of it happens with the buttons that they integrate into the top of the band, you know, where you can comment, where you can like, where you can share. So I think that's part of it. When you like something, they feed you more. If they have your email address, they feed you other TED Talks on that topic. They send you an email and say, oh, if you liked this, you might like these as well. So they begin to interact with you based on what you have said you enjoy. Another thing is when you share it with your friends on Facebook or on Twitter, you have other people then that engage with you about that thing that you watched or that you viewed. And that helps you have another conversation and embed the information in another way in your memory and experience, you know, the fun of talking about it, or, wow, did you like this? Or did you think that was weird? Or could you believe this? One of the reasons I so love that lion talk is because after I watched it, my sister was preparing to teach biology for low-level learners for the first time this fall. She has a new job working at a different school this year, and she has like the general ed level students, and she was trying to figure out how to get them really engaged in the topic. And her, you know, the opening was scientific method. That's the first thing they cover. And I said, wow, I just watched this TED Talk about a kid who's, you know, basically now a freshman in high school, little kid, 14 years old, who figured out via scientific method how to save his family farm from lions. And he's, you know, very watchable, very sweet and funny. And she watched it and she went, you know, wow, this is problem solving that the kids can really understand, and, you know, critical problem solving. You don't want a lion coming into your house. So, you know, it made them feel, I think, you know, we throw that word around a lot, empowered. But here's a kid who, you know, has nothing but, you know, sandals and a solenoid and a thing he's like snatched off somebody's bike, and he's figured out how to save the farm from lions. And it was a big hit in her classroom. So that sharing that and talking about it with her was another way to help solidify. I think that, what Con Guy talks about in terms of pausing and repeating is also big. I've noticed that when I see students working with this material on Con, that they often work in pairs or threes. They crowd around the screen and they say, wait, no, go back. What does he mean there? And then someone else will say, oh, he means this, so see this? And then they'll explain it again. So there's a little community that happens around the screen, not just one person viewing. And I think that's a way to think about using this material with a student that we might be teaching in class is, we sit with the student and we engage and we learn with them and we stop and we ask questions. Did you get that? Show that again. Can you go back? Let's listen to that again. Invite someone to watch with you is a good sort of other technique to add to your repertoire on these. I think it's also nice to, kind of do the zoom out on TED in general and what is it good for. And I think that as you watch several of them, there have been books that have been written about how TED does presentations. So there's something to be learned about what makes an effective presentation. And that's an important quality of what happens on the TED website. Many of the speakers lead with a personal story. They connect you personally to what's happening. And then they follow up with data, information, something that is meaningful. And then they give you a suggestion, something you can do, something you can carry out, a way you can adjust or what you can take away from that presentation. And it almost always closes on that note of a personal or emotional connection to the material from the presenter. Those are the best ones. So that's something to keep in mind, I think, for anyone who's presenting, that the more that you can make yourself conscious of the fact that who you are as a person affects the learner and helps them retain and take away. And how can you get the person emotionally engaged with the material matters. Another thing, though, that people don't talk about as much, but which I think is another quality of TED that's very important, is that it's about problem solving, and it's about a way of looking at problems. Almost all of the talks are about someone sharing, look, I observed this problem, and I addressed it in this way. Now, many of them are scientists, but some are social scientists, some are political thinkers or other kinds of people, working in the world. But that mindset of sort of dispassionately observing, stepping back and saying, hey, there's a problem. What can I do to fix that problem? I think that's a very effective social construct and something that we can use more of in our society. Rather than just observing a problem and having feelings about it, but observing a problem a little bit more from a step back as a scientist. Here's the problem. What could I do about that? How could I change it? What could we do differently? That's a great perspective. So I think that's another reason why this website is important to us sociologically. So.
And they also seem to be very innovative in how they solve their problems.
Yes, yes.
It
right.
makes everyone think differently.
Right.
Too.
The people who are the effective speakers that present their ideas well, they're often presenting something that's innovative. Yes. So anyway, that's what I've got for today, and I hope you learned something. Join me on TED and Con. Thank you.
Thanks.